The following lesson is linked to Learning Outcome 1, Speaking and Listening. It addresses the assessment standard that requires learners to demonstrate knowledge of different forms of oral communication for social purposes. Learners should be able to learn about and share ideas and concepts, comment on experiences, defend a position, make an unprepared response, read aloud, and tell a story. They should also be able to give and follow directions and instructions. Learners should also be able to interact in a group discussion by expressing their own ideas and opinions and listening to and respecting those of others, while engaging with a range of issues such as inclusivity and power relations, environmental, ethical, socio-cultural, and human rights issues.
Hi there, I'm Charlotte, and welcome to our final lesson in this series of Getting into Poetry. Now, we have learned a great deal about poetry in our previous lessons. We saw how poetry developed from the stories told in songs around campfires, through the strict forms of the Renaissance, into the free verse of the postmodern and global eras. Although the format of poems have changed, all poems have something in common. Every poem was written to convey a message to its reader. Every poem has a subject. The subject of a poem is the idea or object, person or place that the poem deals with or represents. Sometimes the subject of a poem is quite obvious. For example, To Autumn by John Keats. Here, without even reading the poem, we would be able to work out that it deals with the subject of autumn. However, the message conveyed in a poem is sometimes obscured, and it takes a careful reading of the poem to reveal this message. Here are some clues that can help you when you are searching for the subject of the poem. Never oversimplify poetry. A poem is a multifaceted method of communication, and sometimes the sound or the specific words chosen, as well as the shape and the form of the poem, can contribute to its meaning. Also remember that not all poems have a single subject. There are poems that deal with a variety of subjects, and others written purely for the enjoyment of the poet's skillful manipulation of the language. Poetry reflects the spirit of the time in which the poet lived, and often served as social commentary on the problems and events of that era. I'm confident that by now you are really getting into poetry, and I would like to conclude this series of lessons by showing you a great way of having fun with poetry. Remember that I told you how poetry became very fashionable during the Renaissance period. Well, often during this time, popular poets would be pitted against each other at banquets as part of the evening's entertainment. Literally, the one with the last rhyme won. Today I'm going to give you some tips on how to arrange a poetry slam of your own. Now, this is a fun and relaxed way to express your creativity. It is non-threatening and will encourage you and your friends to express your ideas through poetry. The poems that evolve at slams are frequently written on the spot, and no one expects them to be at the level of Shakespeare or Yeats. Also, people who participate in slams are relaxed and enjoy the experience of writing poems in a limited time, because the audience is there purely for fun. Now, that is the basic idea behind a poetry slam: to share your creative genius and have loads of fun. Now, it is really easy to run a poetry slam because you need very little equipment. The most important part of the slam is to have people there that are willing to participate and have a good laugh. Now, let's look at what you would need if you want to have a poetry slam. The first thing you will need is a venue. You can use any venue as long as it fits enough people. Your venue can really be informal, like somebody's garden or someone's house. You can also arrange this poetry slam as a class project. Now, then of course, you will need some budding poets to slam with. So the next requirement is at least 10 people. Now, the number of people is really important because slams depend on audience participation and interaction for success. The audience will then supply the topics of the poems and rate the poems by holding up scoring cards when the poems have been read. This brings me to the next requirement: sets of scoring numbers. If you have ever watched diving or ice skating on TV, you would have noticed that at the end of each performance, the judges gives each contestant a score out of 10. Now, this is what you will be doing to other people's poems. But nobody takes this scoring too seriously, but it gives a nice competitive edge to the slam. Now, it's a good idea to ask somebody in the audience to keep track of this scoring. Now, what else would you need for a slam? You will obviously need some paper and pens for the contestants to create their poems. A stopwatch or any other time-keeping device will also come in handy. A stopwatch is to time the teams. Each team must produce a poem in a set period of time. Now, if you do not have a stopwatch, improvise. Somebody is bound to have a cell phone with a timer function, or you can even use a kitchen timer. With all of the excitement, you should also appoint a slam master. The slam master controls the proceedings. He explains the rules of the slam, checks that each member on the teams has a chance to read the poems, and keeps the time. Now that you know what you need, this is how it works. First of all, invite some people to join you. Try and invite people that have a good sense of humor or who enjoy expressing themselves, as well as some of the rather quiet people. It takes all sorts of people to create great poetry. When everyone arrives at the slam master needs to ask for team volunteers. 2 per team is ideal. The slam master will then introduce the team members. Your slam master should have a strong personality and a loud voice so that he or she can be heard over the fun of the occasion. The slam master will distribute the scoring cards to the audience. The scorers will hold up the score they believe the poem is worth after it has been read. The scorekeeper will make notes of these. Another way in which the audience gets involved is that they are asked to supply the topics for the poems. Now, these topics can be very serious, like trauma, or it can be rather silly, like smelly socks. It is then the slam master's duty to pick the most suitable topics. Each team is given a specific time to compose a poem on the topic. It can be any time period you decide on, but once you have decided, you must stick to the time limitation. When the time is up, the slam master shouts "time," and the first member of one of the teams that stands up gets to decide who will read their poem first. Once the poem has been read, the scorers in the audience hold up the number that they believe is a fair score for that poem. As you can imagine, this causes some interesting reactions. Then the other team has an opportunity to read their poem on the same topic, and the audience can rate their poem. It is a good idea to let the members of the teams exchange places with members from the audience. In this way, most people at the slam has an opportunity to write poetry and to score the prospective poets. The structure of the slam is fairly open and can be adapted to suit the occasion and the audience. There are many variations that you can try. For example, you can get the entire team to perform an impromptu poem. Impromptu means to perform without rehearsing. The teams are given absolutely no time to prepare, and every member of the team needs to contribute to the presentation of the poem. In other words, the first team member starts with 2 lines, and then the other members add on to this until every member of the team has had a turn. As you can imagine, this is great fun for the audience. Try a poetry slam in class with your friends or over a weekend. Poetry slams are means of keeping poetry alive and contemporary. Do not think that poetry belongs in dusty books or in a previous century. Poetry is vibrantly alive in South Africa. Thanks for joining me for this series of lessons on getting into poetry, and look out for future lessons on studying poetry. Bye-bye.